So, hi everyone, thanks for joining us on our Teaching and Learning Roundtable in Archaeology and Heritage. We've had a bit of a gap in sessions due to industrial action and various things, but it's really great to be back, so thank you for joining us.
Yeah, industrial action and COVID, really.
Yeah, and COVID, yeah. Yeah. And so I'm just thinking what we normally say at the beginning.
I know we're out of practice. We normally say that we started these a couple of years ago now during the pandemic, and that they are really very relaxed and informal sessions. They're a way of just bringing people together for conversation about teaching and learning in archaeology, because there aren't really that many opportunities. So it's really nice to have these kind of discussions. We open them up to a global audience. I don't know where everyone's here from today, but I think the timing of this one is one that sort of is pretty good for a UK and European audience, but perhaps we might not have people from elsewhere in the world today. But we try and sort of open them up as widely as possible. They're very relaxed sessions, so the format of today is that we'll hear a couple of papers. Those are the bits that are being recorded and will pop on our website, but then we're very relaxed and have lots of relaxed discussion, and it's a totally non-judgmental atmosphere, and we've got a code of conduct which I will find in a second and pop in the chat. Is there anything else, Karina?
No, I don't think so. Usual Zoom etiquette, but everyone's used to that now. So mute if you're not speaking, etc. But yeah, we know what we're doing with that. And I guess actually, as a small number of people, we could probably do we don't normally do introductions for a whole group, but actually, as we've got a small number, we may as well. So I'll kick off by saying I'm here.
Do we want to pause the recording for the introductions in case people don't want to be recorded to go in the world?
Good.
Okay, over to you, Steph.
Thanks, Hannah. I suppose just a very quick introduction, because we're a bit of a smaller group as well, it gives us a little bit more flexibility with timing. So I'm really looking forward to having a really open discussion with you. I suppose a little bit of background, Marcel and I had I think what we'll be presenting today is a bit of a reprise, can I ever pronounce that word, of papers that we presented in a session at the EAA in September. Entirely unbeknownst to ourselves, came up with almost very, very similar things on a very, very similar topic. And it just seemed like a really good opportunity to begin to collaborate and talk through these things about how we use how we do our teaching and our learning in universities, and also the students' perceptions around climate change in the past, and how this informs how we tackle things in the present. So that's what we're going to kick off with, really, is to give those presentations to you. Apologies if you may have already seen that in that session before. And then we've got some questions for yourselves as well. We've got we've got a Mentimeter poll, of course, bringing in all these new virtual pedagogic tools that we've got so familiar with over the last couple of years, just to see how you use or implement understandings of climate change in your teaching, and whether you do, and then sort of follow up with discussions on that. So just around those questions that we have, and yeah, get your opinions on things. So Marcel, I don't know if I've missed anything. Is there anything you wanted to add to that? Would you like to do your presentation first? I haven't asked.
Yeah, of course. I'm just in a second where it is. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, just maybe not now. This is okay. Anyway, but first I need to say I'm still, it's like four weeks ago I had COVID, and I'm still suffering a little bit. So I need to be calm and cutely. So some facts. It's like what I'm presenting you today is more or less the outcome of a course which named Introduction into Early Prehistory. And this course is taught at the University of Rostock at the chair of prehistory, and the chair of prehistory is relatively new It was founded in 2016, and which is quite unusual for Germany, that all history teacher trainees at Rostock University, or at least half of them, they need to pass an exam in the early prehistory, and half of them need to pass an exam in the later prehistory. So this is an interesting side aspect, because we don't only have the archaeological students, but also the history teacher trainees. So, and they have a completely different perception and background, and thereby it's also a nice opportunity to give them more width, and maybe also to not focus on the fossil director of every archaeological culture subgroup, but on the big picture. And 70% of these lectures are dealing with the Pleistocene and early Holocene hunter-gatherers, and Neolithization is only shortly tangled. A short survey was conducted during summer 2021 for the classes, for the 2 classes before. And you see it's like 20 of 75 students replied. And the second cohort was done only some weeks before, and of 30 students, 8 answered. And you need to say the sample is probably it's small, and it is definitely biased, because not everybody replied, and maybe only the people which are more interested in are taking the chance. But nonetheless, it is fruitful to understand a little bit more about learning about climate change and teaching archaeology. And also for me, it was really interesting to get an idea about the background knowledge of the student about different topics. And now go further. And yeah, of course, when you're talking about climate change and prehistoric communities, in this case, hunter-gatherer communities, this is the 2 topics which are most important. And the first questions were going to their background knowledge. And this is just the list, because we are, it's like the course is really starting with Australopithecus, and then is going until the Neolithic. And I just made a list of some global phenomena and some regional phenomena we had here, and you see these are really a lot. And what is for me, and what was also for them very interesting, that many of them include stories of successful transition. And yeah, what you see here is the first question: how do you rank your knowledge about climate changes during the last million years before visiting the class? And what you see here is nearly half of them were saying nearly nothing. So we are talking here really about the big issue, the Earth, and so nearly nothing was known to them before about climate change before entering the class. And you also see it's like the best you can get from the answers is not good, not bad. There's nobody in it saying I'm really good in it, and my background knowledge is very high. And just to show you the few people answered this year, it's more or less the same. Half of them are saying I didn't know anything about it, and only a few people saying not good, not bad. But also there, nobody said I'm really informed about this issue. The second question in this direction was, with which specific environmental or climatic dynamic did you were aware of before visiting the class? And you see here now it's like the numbers here are the number of answers, and you see most of the people were saying long time ago there was an ice age. I don't know how long it was ago, but there was something. Maybe I saw some cinemas and some movies about it, but and there was one person saying something about the Eemian or the Green Sahara. So this is somewhere there. But most of the people, or many people, also said that they have no idea about the time depth of the ice age or other dynamics we have talked about in the course. The next issue, this was 2 small questions for the climate. One question regarding the hunter-gatherers. we talked about in the class, and the question how rank your knowledge about your about hunter-gatherer societies before visiting the class. And also here, it's nearly the same. Half of them were saying that they knew nearly nothing. And also here, you see not good, not bad is the best you can get. And also last year, it is more or less the same, even if maybe if you had here 2 people representing this small area, so maybe people are a little bit better informed, but this is not statistically relevant here. So also for me, this it's really important where we need to keep this in mind when we are communicating issues about hunter-gatherer societies. So there is no really background you can build your models or hypotheses of, so you need to start from the scratch. Next topic is hunter-gatherer communities and the transition story. So about human-climate interaction, say it like that. And after 1 year or 2 years, it was a question, which specific impact of climate change onto hunter-gatherer societies do you remember? So some people said, I don't remember anything. This was maybe the people that didn't pass the exam, I don't know. Glaciers are very important to these people. It's like the Ice Age. You saw it before, is something they had in mind before. And the big glaciers we had in Rostock, the last glacier maximum, I think this is a picture they had in mind, and this state. The temperature fluctuations also impacting the plant growth and so on. Some people remembered that. Sea level changes because we are in the Baltic Sea, on the Baltic Sea. This was something remembered, and also volcanism was something the people remembered, that there are there's some outcome people need to adapt or react to. The next question was, which strategies of hunter-gatherer communities to cope with these changes do you remember from the class? And you see here migration into better habitats, innovations, and adaptation of subsistence strategies were remembered, and also which is quite interesting in high numbers. So, but on the other side, it's like migration and innovation. These are also topics for coping today climate crisis. So maybe there was some kind of transfer going on already. And the last question, and maybe it's like the most important for me, also to enhance a little bit the lecture. Does the content of the lecture encompass information for a deeper understanding of the current climate crisis? If yes, please give example which content is important for you. And you see here that that 15 people said yes, it was somehow important. 5 people said no. And if you take a look at the answers of the second question about the examples, which context was important, you have you can subdivide it into something like enhanced background knowledge, and the second is the implications for emotional dealing with the climate crisis. I just labeled it like this, and you see here the background knowledge. Which was most important is that climate change is a constant issue on this planet, and which is really important here, that our basics are their bottom line of this. So it's like when we are talking about climate crisis, or if you want to bring the prehistoric scenarios into the current dynamics to compare them or to interlink them, we really need to keep this in mind. Then the past climate dynamics can be compared to actual processes to better understand what we can expect in the future, was said by 3 people, and 2 said, I know what we're currently living in an interglacial phase, which is called Holocene, so this is also nice. And the last point was this kind of emotional dealing, and there are 5 people saying that to know that humans have successfully coped many kinds of climate changes make me little bit more relaxed concerning the actual climate crisis. So one person was saying, so we are still alive, what a surprise. And but also this was 2020 and 2019. And here are 3 more quotes from the last year. And this was making me a little bit upset, because it's like you see here, regarding the present dynamics, it was sad to see how many species we have already lost. It's mainly related to the Pleistocene-Holocene border. We can't beat the nature, but it is under constant change. So also it's not depressive, but it's also some kind of burden. And the last one, we have seen what are the implications of climate change without direct human impact. This makes me afraid about the current crisis. So yeah, also something to take with from this kind of poll. And I will try to continue with that. And also it's like to get at least some kind of maybe not statistically significant data, but some kind of qualitative data to maybe improve this kind of course, and maybe also to with colleagues together to merge some courses into one which is directly linked with this topic. And it's really nice to be here today. So and I think this was the last year. Yeah, this was it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Marcel. It's really wonderful, and it's lovely to see that summary with added new data as well from from this year. So it's kind of interesting to see how that's consistently gone through. I guess I suppose any reflections. I suppose we could take a couple of minutes for sort of a reflection on Marcel's presentation. I don't know if anyone had any immediate thoughts. If not, I'm quite happy to go into mine without.
Monica has her hand up.
Oh, so you do? That's why you've moved. I wonder why you jumped. I've never quite dealt with it. Never had to do that.
You moved up, so you realise someone has their hand up. No, I was very surprised, and a bit worried that the outcome of this is sort of, oh, it's happened before, so we can relax a bit, or we cannot do anything about it, so let's just, So I'm wondering whether you have anything to say about that, whether we're trying to use past climate change to inform, the current climate crisis, but at the same time, the result might be that people get a bit complacent because of it.
I think the main issue is that this is just the basic class for teaching teaching archaeology and getting an overview about the early prehistory and Rostock. So it's like I don't want to overboard this class with this climate issue too much, because I'm really interested in this, and I think it's really, we need to do something there, and it's also, it is an opportunity, because over half of the people there, they will become history teachers. So they are going to the kids, and they can take something with from this class, maybe, hopefully, and but anyway, yeah, it's like the kind of the last quotes were really, it's like a little bit also a downer for me, and I'm thinking about to make something like a about one lecture after the exams, just to talk about this climate crisis issue, and to get the people and get a little, not to do this kind of poll afterwards, but to get more into discussion with the people, and maybe just to highlight some few positive elements, because of course it's like there's so much in it, but on the other side there's also so much to misunderstand, and like every time, and these are only 12 times 1 hour and a half, so it's like you cannot do everything.
Tabitha's put a question in the chat as well. I'll read it out because she's has to be keeping quiet. So she says her question is whether the students spoke about how they can integrate this knowledge about hunter-gatherer responses to climate change into their own teaching, presumably those who are going to be the history teachers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, I think it's like what I got from their, it's like from this poll, but also from their direct reaction or ideas, even if it was complicated after COVID or during COVID, is that it's like we really need here to start from the scratch. It's like they are not starting directly in the class, or how I can integrate it into my class. They are just sitting there and saying, oh, okay, we had this kind of climate change before, or this is really strange. And then you have all this different kind of scenarios you're presenting them, because it's like in the end, I'm really not kind of some kind of researcher who is into climate determinism, but it's like when you're going through history or prehistory, early prehistory, you have this kind of topic is popping up every time. But I think it's like you need another class for just more to put this more in detail, I guess. But it would be great, but it's like this kind of responses just only occasionally happens. So I'm not sure is it answering your question? It's like,
yeah, Tabitha's nodding.
Okay.
I wanted to ask a question about the kind of last point you made about the students who felt nervous or anxious about it, and how we address sort of embedding teaching about climate change whilst also sort of being sensitive to the sort of effects that thinking about the climate change, the catastrophizing effects that thinking about climate change can have for students. But I wonder if that's something to pick up a little bit later on, because it'd be really interesting to hear whether Steph talks about that too, and to sort of maybe pick that up afterwards. Do you want to preempt?
Yeah, that would be, maybe you can talk about afterwards. That would be nice.
Cool. Does anyone else have any other questions, or shall we hand over to Steph? Over to you then, Steph. The floor's yours.
Thank you. I'm gonna, as ever, we've been doing this for however long and still not managed to do it in any kind of systematic way. There we go. Can you see my screen?
Oh yes, we can now. Yes.
So yes, so this is the paper that we presented. So I might go on a little bit longer than Marcel, so I hope I can indulge your time. So it is largely anecdotal evidence that we've just brought from our own personal experiences, really, teaching at the University of York. So, but also bringing in from a MOOC as well, the MOOC that we run on StarCar. So it's kind of interesting to see how that contrasts with student perceptions versus sort of more general the general public. So what we wanted to really know and investigate was what students and learners already know about these periods, about hunter-gatherers, and what they believe or assume about them, and whether this kind of fits into our expectations as educators versus what it is that we want them to know. Obviously, as students, they're going to be assessed on this at the end of the day. And then from a pedagogical sort of, perspective, how do our teaching methods address this, and what tools do we have, whether or not they're effective, and if there are other approaches we can take. So we'll kind of summarise up with how we see communication of the relevance of human responses to climate change in the past around the present and contemporary concerns. But we do encounter, and I think this is something that Marcel has already picked up on, is that when we teach students about, particularly in my case, the Upper Paleolithic and the Mesolithic, and the climate change and significant climatic events of the late Pleistocene and early Holocene, they do form that backdrop, and we build on their understanding of this through subsistence practices, technology and culture, and it's generally in that order. So this is perhaps something that also needs reflecting on. And just thinking about the environmental archaeological approaches, of course, thinking about Star Carr, thinking about the legacy of Professor Graham Clark, and how that those environmental approaches kind of informed British archaeological approaches for prehistory, has meant that, and one of our dearly departed colleague, Don Henson, said that this serves to place the environment as a key framing device for the Mesolithic. And so we see these ecological models, and they're coupled with the integration of anthropological approaches, especially during the 1980s. And this kind of led to an imagining of the Mesolithic as this kind of Arcadia. And we still see this with our own students. And I think that's quite unsurprising when really they learn about this apparent utopia that the Holocene became when the previous perceptions was, as Marcel quite beautifully put it, there was an ice age a long time ago. So when we ask learners about, do you think studying past climate change can inform us about the present day situation? This is taken from the Future Learn MOOC that we did. Then there's a resoundingly positive response. I don't have any firm metadata for this, but you can see that, yes, they do agree climate change, learning about it in the past is important to the present day. And this is drawn from a really large suite of learners across several runs. So that's good. We see that in the students that we teach. So I think that's a very positive takeaway. But then when we move to whether or not human responses in the past can inform the present day, there seems to be a bit more of a divide, and this is an accumulation of last 2 years of data from a very small data set. And last year, actually, there was a lot more negative responses compared to this year. And I don't know if that might have been to do with the time in which I was teaching this particular module, was actually during the same week as the tsunami that hit Tonga. So perhaps it was a little bit more forefront of people's minds. So I asked students, both in their second year and at MA level, is understanding human hunter-gatherer responses to climate change in the past helpful to tackling these issues now? And mostly I've been quite curious to understand what motivated those negative responses, as Marcel's also pointed out. And they cited contemporary issues, including population, economy, personal economic security, bureaucracy of crossing geopolitical boundaries. And they had a very fixed idea of a sense of place around sedentism, essentially. And also one quite poignant one that came out of this year's response was the fact that the scenarios of climate change are completely incomparable, given the scale of industrialized nations' contributions to the present situation versus during the early Holocene. So I think here we can see that this idea, this Arcadia paradigm is expanding, really. It's not only they're thinking about this kind of utopian environment of the early Mesolithic from an ecological standpoint, but also maybe that hunter-gatherers in the past, and thus by implication the present, are kind of free from these trappings of contemporary industrialized capitalist societies. And that really, to me, that kind of was a quote by Davies, Robin Ladbroke in a recent, not so recent now, antiquity paper about, this was actually about social aspects of woodland clearance during the Mesolithic. But it really painted this assumption that all land was accessible and utilised, nothing was strange or alien, and wilderness as a concept did not exist. So it's maintaining this continued perception that people during the Mesolithic kind of lived in this terra nullius. So faced with changing climates or significant climatic events, they could just mitigate this by moving, essentially, without constraint. Which was, and really interestingly, one of them, like the primary responses, or the most common response to Marcel's question, was that migration is the way to deal with this. And we see that obviously climate refugees are very much going to be, and presently are, a contemporary concern, but also I wonder if it's somewhat quite colonial as well, because I think that it's underscoring some kind of disconnect between natural environment and social environment, perhaps that that hunter-gatherers do not own their land, so they can just move wherever, but actually there would be significant constraints on this. And I've seen kind of in wider reading that this is noted by educators following with climate change across disciplines and across the university sector. So in terms of coping with climate change, and to sort of highlight the star car example again, we have there's a paper, and I've got references at the end of the presentation, that readers are presented with about the article from the site that indicates that whilst climate change at the time would have been quite severe, the evidence from Star Car shows that people were actually staying there, continued to occupy the site. Their activities didn't change substantially. And so they're asked, what does this tell you about the people of Star Car? And this word cloud is just taken from their top 10 most frequently used words from their responses. And I think to some extent, those are quite influenced by the language in the article. But also they're strongly identifying this adaptability and resilience of the people that lived there. And also quite closely tied to this was availability of resources and food supplies. Obviously this is a very pertinent issue right now. And I think this again demonstrates that environment is perceived to be the most important factor in determining hunter-gatherer lifeways. But they also really pick up on resilience of aspects of long-term occupation at the site, and a strong sense of place. And quite frequently people were saying that they were stubborn or hardiness, the hardiness of the occupants, and this quite led to frequent comparisons with present-day people in Yorkshire. So I don't know what that's quite saying about present-day people in Yorkshire being stubborn, but very much determined not to move in the face of these changes. But I think actually that's, joking aside, could be actually a really good tool, because it can harness this means of unothering people from the past. So facilitating more tangible connections, I guess, between us and them, not very different, and also kind of breaking the trope that hunter-gatherers in the past were unintelligent or unskilled or anything. So we were really encouraged to see that there's a recognition of that significance of sense of place, which you tend not to see picked up when in more sort of stereotypical depictions of hunter-gatherers in the past. And so we can kind of undermine these environmental deterministic perspectives, and showing, forefronting hunter-gatherers in the past and present have culture. But maybe there are some issues as well, because by blurring that distinction between us and them, and if they, as in the Mesolithic, were more like us, just thinking about maybe that does marginalise mobile lifeways, perhaps, from if we're thinking sort of post-Neolithic colonial perspectives, and not saying that actually mobile lifeways, it's an other way of life, and so just also not wanting to misappropriate ideas of them in Star Car as ancient Yorkshire folk being misappropriated as British indigeneity, which we've quite seen with Star Car, with Cheddar Man. So there are, I think, careful nuances there that need unpicking. And a couple of our graduate teaching assistants have also reflected on their experiences, and Jess Bates has looked at when she was teaching during the second year students, and that she thinks that to combat this idea of otherness is to present the past in a way that enables students to engage with it in a more personal level, and to connect with that. So we have seen that a bit, and using narrative learning is probably a really good tool to do this. Because as Jess rightly points out, those narratives trigger all our imaginations, and that it transports us back through a vivid creation, reconstructions, painting pictures. It really brings it to life, and I think we can all connect with that. And it makes it far more accessible, which, when we're talking about something, a time period that is very remote, 11,000 years is not an insignificant period of time, and also something that students have possibly never really learned about before. It means that we can bridge that divide, and we're engaging with people rather than just abstract ideas. So we do see that students kind of hone in on that temporal distance, sometimes for good, and they recognise that, but also sometimes it can be in the negative as well. Because Jess has seen that somehow this leads to ideas of escapism. And so when, particularly during the pandemic, she asked students why they enjoy studying Mesolithic, it is this idea of being transported to a different time when things were better or different. So obviously we've been very constrained in our social interactions over the last few years, and I think it became very, very poignant to them is that they were away, being transported through this, away from stresses and strains of what they were dealing with in their personal lives. And so perhaps this then becomes a bit of a cushion and a bubble, and it inhibits critical reflection on the time period, so that these kind of descriptive narratives bleed through, but actually students aren't stopping and thinking critically about it, and it's kind of encouraging generalizations rather than studying nuance. And perhaps also this narrative idea and using narrative teaching, we often build this from ethnographies as well, and it does aid, of course, interpretations of archaeological data. We use it all the time, and it's a very, very useful interpretative tool. But perhaps in the way that we teach here at York, we give them an example of bad ethnography as a learning tool to critically reflect on the application, and also colonial influences in archaeological theory and discourse. But then students become very, very critical of it all. So rather than reflecting on what we can learn from it regarding different worldviews and our own biases from a Western standpoint, they're just very critical of everything. And the papers that we use, it then creates a disconnect between the students and the past, because ethnography really is very important, and we need to encourage them to think of it in a positive way, to be able to understand and consider hunter-gatherers past and present as real people, of course, as individuals they are, who experience things. So Jess has suggested that a way forward is perhaps use better ethnographies, such as ones that use Indigenous voices, and this, of course, provides a platform, and people are spotlighted as living through these climatic changes, many of which already adversely impacted. So this is really, really significant to be able to do this, and recognising it creates these issues and makes those ones that happened in the past more real, more relatable. And so we can use this narrative theory, I think, in a positive way too. And Taryn Bell, who's one of our other GTAs, has also thought about her experiences, and she's noticed that particularly in literature around the Paleolithic, that there is more of a development using blending ethnographies and making more explicit explorations of links between past and present climate change. And again, as we've said, reflects is more effective for students, and it makes them easier to connect the relevance for this. And particularly she highlighted the paper by Halfon and Barkai as a really good example of connecting anthropology and archaeology together. And one of the other things that Taryn highlighted is how discussions of the Paleolithic often involve catastrophes, which we don't see sort of within the Holocene so much, megafaunal extinctions, the disappearance of Neanderthals and so on. And so on the ground, obviously, from an archaeological perspective, and we're used to seeing this from the longue durée, that this was a very gradual change. And sometimes I think projecting forwards is something that we struggle with today, because the notion that these small changes add up to having a big impact. Of course, we can see it in the past, but actually recognising what's going on with the impact of the future is a little bit more difficult, though I think with, of course, COP22 really helps to do that. But perhaps the downside to these long-term changes, again, makes it hard for them to see the relevance. And this is really, I think, we see this in our teaching. It's so time restricted. We only get, what, 2 hours a week perhaps to deal with these topics. Taryn has highlighted sort of her teaching of Paleolithic ecology, for example. It's a huge topic, yet she only has an hour in a seminar to be able to deal with this. So she doesn't feel like it's doing the subject justice. So how do we use this time effectively to teach in a way that prevents these generalizations? And how can we embed more interdisciplinary aspects in our teaching? For example, with ecology, do students even really fully understand and get to grips with how significant this is? And perhaps that's something we need to change. And she's also highlighted that, again, inclusion of Indigenous voices and better narratives is really vital to doing this, particularly when also understanding hunter-gatherer relationships with landscapes and with animals, which is very different from a Western viewpoint. So just to sort of conclude and not take up too much of your time, is that we think it's really worthwhile unpacking the students' perceptions of hunter-gatherers in the past and the present, what they are. And we need to do this more nuanced in a complex way because they are likely to vary based on prior knowledge, their socioeconomic background, and a lot of other factors. So I think this can allow for multivocality and co-creation because I think maybe what we're teaching them is not necessarily the correct or the sole interpretation of the past. So by using narrative theory, it allows for these multivocal perspectives. Storytelling has been and always will be a powerful and effective pedagogic tool, and in archaeology when it's used responsibly, and it's really valuable as well as an important step in decolonial practice and situating different perspectives and worldviews. And with this short time we have with the students, we can deconstruct this Arcadia paradigm of early prehistory, and then the students are equipped with critical skills to question things in the future and recognise the human and natural spheres, and just this can lead into addressing contemporary environmental issues, whatever roles they take in society and beyond university. And I just wanted to end with a couple of really nice quotes from Lochenko and O'Brien that I think are really relevant as our students are affected by the Anthropocene, as undoubtedly hunter-gatherers were living at the end of the Pleistocene. And they say, teaching is about the emotional dimensions of climate. Teaching about the emotional dimensions of climate change can help students relate to a wide range of feelings and to explore how possibility, a sense of purpose and constructive hope can motivate action. And then they go on to paraphrase Peterson and Barnes and say, activating a sense of individual and collective agency within the classroom is also critical for initiating larger scale changes. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steph. That was great. Me and Karina exchanged messages during that as well when you mentioned Don Henson and you showed the Henson huts, because we owe a great deal of gratitude to Don, who obviously was a leading person in teaching and learning in archaeology and supported us personally in our careers greatly, and we worked with him lots. And yeah, so I didn't know about that there was the Henson hut, so that's lovely, a really lovely tribute to him. That's an aside. Anyway, does anyone have any questions for Steph based on her paper? I know you've got questions for us. Oh, sorry.
I was going to ask one, but actually Tabitha's typed one, so we'll go with Tabitha's first. So Tabitha said, I had a question on the use of ethnography for teaching. How do you envisage the ways to include present day Indigenous groups as analogies for these past voices in order to present a better ethnography?
That is a very good question, and that is definitely ongoing. As I think every time, every year we update reading lists, and just being part of the obviously a lot of work that's going on in the universities. Learning myself, I know that I need to expand my knowledge of Indigenous scholars, and I think CHAGS, that's going to be the conference on hunting and gathering societies, that's going to be in Dublin in June, is going to be so useful to be able to expanding that. So I think yeah, really we need to learn first before we teach our students, and so yeah, expanding that, and bringing in groups and NGOs and having a greater dialogue, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I was just a bit struck when you said, you know, someone having an hour to teach all of what was it, a paleo ecology, and that's just quite quite something, isn't it? But we tend to do that all the time, don't we? We tend to have like often quite pigeonholed slots to get the main messages across. Like, you know, how much can we get across like in an hour? Is that okay? Is it better to do an hour than nothing at all? Or, you know, what's the kind of, what should we be doing?
Yeah, I'd say, well, an hour is always better than nothing at all, but perhaps, I don't, it's structural, it's structural, isn't it? So how you design your modules, your curriculum, the expectations of how much students can go away and do in their own time through independent learning. So yeah, one lecture on this and then one seminar is better than nothing, but it is really
not a lot, is it?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where, you know, expanding to more interdisciplinary perspectives and perhaps more team taught things could be helpful.
I think it's difficult as well, particularly from a UK perspective, about the kind of, this isn't really the time and place to get into this, is it? Because this is a totally aside, but the like, you know, the neoliberal nature of higher education in the UK means that our courses have to be reduced because they need to be efficient in terms of student numbers and who, you know, bums on seats and all of that kind of thing. And I think it's those kind of things that constrain then that freedom to have time to talk about them. But that is very depressing. Let's not go down that. Let's talk about other depressing things instead. So Steph and Marcel, did you want to sort of pose some questions for us? I'm going to stop the recording as well at this point, shall I? Having now whined.
Yeah, we've got some. Oh, sorry. Well, yeah, we've